The Winnipeg Jets are off to a perfect 8-0-0 start. The Nashville Predators bounce back with 3 straight wins as they prepare for Steven Stamkos' emotional return to Tampa Bay. And the Seattle Kraken look for consistency after dropping 3 straight. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host among our network who has to be the happiest right now with the way his team is playing, Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. And Harrison, 8-0-0, can't start any better than that. What are some of the biggest reasons for this team's early success?
Well, the Jets are a really interesting team so far this year. Still getting a handle on exactly what kind of team they are because, there's definitely some areas where they're super, super strong and some where, there's what I would call room for improvement. That's a really generous way of saying it in some ways. But the best thing about this team is definitely the special teams. And it's not just the power play. I know the power play is like near 40%. Might have dropped a little bit after yesterday's game, but still operating at a pretty crazy clip. But the PK actually is doing pretty well as well. I think they're around 85-ish%. And it's not just the goalie bailing them out. It just seems like they're more aggressive. They've made life a lot harder for power play units. And so that's really what we've been asking for. And even last night, we actually had our first shorthanded goal of the season. And it was because we had a power kill with Kyle Connor on it. Instead of using our usual third and fourth liners, the Jets are trying to use more skill there, and it actually led directly to a goal. So that's pretty nice. Having threats all up and down your team is great, especially on the power play and PK, because those were 2 areas where the Jets have basically been bottom of the league the last few years. So we haven't really had a power play this good since we had Line A, and that is, at this point, ancient history. So nice to see that working well. Hellebuyck has also been really good. He's not starting as many games as he did last year through the first couple of games, which is nice. Comrie's already had 2 starts, which, hey, that's pretty great. You're supposed to use your backup a little more. He's a little iffy, but, most goalies this year are, well, not great. I think the league average is under 900 this year or something like that. So
yeah,
it's been a bit rough if you're the man in net, but not for Helly. He's always just fantastic. So never a worry there. The last thing that I think has really been good is certainly the third and fourth lines, especially the Lowry line. Now they're actually more like the second line, but everyone calls them the best third line in hockey. So I guess we'll just stick to it. But we all know that they play like second line minutes. So they've been really helping us out where some of the skill lines have maybe struggled a bit more than I think a lot of us were hoping.
You do have a lot of scoring depth right now. 8 players on this roster are at a point a game or better. Who has been the biggest surprise early this season that has helped lead this team to an 8-0 start?
There's a couple of candidates. I'm going to give one that probably won't get a lot of credit, but I think deserves it. Neil Pionk this year has been a lot better than he's been in previous years. And like defensively, you still get the same Neil Pionk. He'll still have some missed assignments. He had one game, I think, against the Kraken the other day where he was basically involved in every goal, both positive and negative. He had some pizzas that he probably would like back that got turned into goals against. But then, he also had some game-winning moments, including a drawn penalty in overtime. So all sorts of fun, funky stuff that just happens when you're Neil Pionk. But he's been allowed to be really offensively ambitious this year, and having Sandberg as his partner, who's a little bit better at tracking back than Brendan Dillon was, I think just lets him feel like he can basically be his fourth forward self. When he doesn't have to worry about defense, he's a different kind of player. And he's been really fun. If there's one guy that I actually really root for, I know every team has like a bad defender or something. And in his case, I just feel like he's always been accountable for the fact that he struggles. And he's sort of talked about it in the past. And so seeing him have like a point per game pace so far, really couldn't happen to somebody that I was rooting for more.
You mentioned there are some areas this team you're still not sure about, or they need to work on a little bit. What are some of those areas, and can they be improved?
Oh boy. Yeah. So the top line continues to be just a bit of a black hole. Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde are just terrible together. I don't know how you take so much skill and make it not work, but that trio has been, their goal differential is terrible. Some of it's a little bit unlucky. They're not quite as bad as I think they've seemed at times, but they're like a -5 already on the season together. And, Velarde basically looks like he's a passenger, and I don't think it's just his own individual effort. I just think he's not really playing with a line that fits his style. Scheifele has, he's scoring a lot, but it's not really at even strength, and that's kind of a problem because that's where he has to win his matchups, and he really hasn't been. If there's anyone on that line that's actually been doing surprisingly well, it's Connor. He's been really defensively engaged. He's actually forced a couple of turnovers that turned into goals. And in yesterday's game, when he had a shorthanded effort, he actually outmuscled Blake Coleman, which I've never seen him do. Usually he gets pushed off the puck pretty easily and stuff, but this year it seems like he's a little more engaged. And, I really don't lump him in as much with the top line issues. This is like the first year that he's kind of had this stuff. So, not going to like rush to judgment and say it's going to happen for the rest of the year, but great to see him at least being really bought in. But that line is just, it's so bad because they play like 20 plus minutes a night, and it makes everyone else's job really hard if that top line isn't softening its matchups. And it really hasn't so far. There's been a couple of shifts where they've looked good, but yeah. And, with Vlad Nemesnikov trying to play 2C with Ehlers and Perfetti, that line has had some issues. It was worse to start. They've started putting 2 and 2 together, but I think, Nemesnikov has been less a driver of that than Ehlers and Perfetti are. But, at least right now, they're probably Winnipeg's best skill line, I guess, other than the Lowry line. So, it does seem like Arniel's keyed on that. He did play them a little more in the first period yesterday than the Scheifele line. So it's not just us that sees it. Arniel is also seeing it. He even benched him for one shift in the game prior. So they really need to figure that out, because if they can't get that line going and they're not really willing to change it, then you're going to have to start sheltering it, which I'm pretty sure the Jets are not going to do.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they don't want to go down that road. Harrison, how good do you think this team really is, and can they be contenders throughout the whole season, or is this just a hot start?
I think this team has the pieces to be a threat. You look at the West, and there's just not that many teams that are good. There's a couple that are like strong on paper, and maybe they've had good starts to the year. I think Dallas is one of the better teams. But you look around and, like, aside from Vegas, Dallas, and some of the usual suspects, even the Avs just aren't the same. Edmonton is slower and older and doesn't seem that good this year. There's just, when Calgary is leading the Pacific Division, clearly something's changed. And I know it's only 8 games in, but I think you're kind of seeing that there's going to be a lot of middle-of-the-pack squads that are good in some ways, but very flawed in others. And so I think for the Jets, I thought that they'd be more of a wild card team this year. It does seem like they have the special teams and goaltending to push more towards the top of the division. And if they ever figure out the top line stuff, at that point, the team is going to be in much better straits. If they can start winning their 5v5 stuff with their skill lines, it's game over for the rest of the conference. So the Jets are I'd say they're 3/4 of the way there. There's a lot that goes right for them, and the power play is not going to click along at 40% forever. But I still think this team has enough and could add at the trade deadline to be a pretty nasty team, at least a 1 or 2 series winning kind of team in the postseason. As far as cup contender status is concerned, I'm not there yet. There's definitely still a lot that I need to see from this team. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention, but has clearly been really bad is Morrissey and DeMello together have been one of the worst D pairings I've seen on this team. And it's like bizarre because last year they were so good. So I don't know what's up with that. I don't know if it's just a short term thing, but if that also continues to be a problem, it's going to really cap the Jets' ceiling. But so far, trying to enjoy the ride and not think about the long term. But I do know that there's enough there to where you probably think in a playoff series, it might be hard for the Jets to advance without fixing a couple of these issues.
All right. Well, Harrison, I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, sure. I'm on X/Twitter at HLLivingLoco. Our show podcast Twitter is at LO_Winnipeg Jets. And our Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast is available where Locked On NHL is, on YouTube, Spotify, all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Check us out there.
Harrison, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when my picks hit, I can get my money in as little as 15 minutes. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So, again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Predators, Ann Kimmel. And let me ask you this. Have you been able to figure out this very schizophrenic Nashville Predators team losing 5 in a row to start the season and now winning 3 in a row? Let's start with this. What's the biggest difference in the last 3 games?
That's such a great question because it took us a while to figure out what in the world was wrong in those first 5 games. But I think part of it is the communication has improved. I think that they're starting to connect a little bit better. They, of course, added some big pieces in the offseason, and we knew that it would take a while for those new players to get up to speed with the system and kind of learn and unlearn what they needed to be effective under Andrew Brunette. I think what surprised everybody, especially in those first 5 games, is that the team that has been here and had success with Andrew Brunette last year under the system struggled to effectively play that system in the first 5 games. And so I think you're seeing the team that knows what to do finally executing a little bit better than they did in those first 5 games.
What was the biggest thing that the team seemed to be having difficulty with?
There were a couple of things that really turned it into a perfect storm to start the season. I think one of the things very unconsciously is that the team almost unconsciously deferred to players like Steven Stamkos and sort of wanted him to get started and sort of carry the offense. And it's going to take time for Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault to get to a point where it's more reflexive what they need to do under Andrew Brunette. So I think that there was some unconscious deferring going on. They were trying to show that they were a highly skilled team instead of just putting their heads down and doing the work they needed to do to be effective. Also saw some of the players that were really good offensive performers last year struggle early. The top line of Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, and Gus Nyquist really hasn't gelled quite as well to begin this season as they had been playing last season. So a bunch of little things really created a perfect storm where Nashville couldn't get out of their own way. And that ended up in an 0-5 start.
So here you are, 3 straight wins. Looks like things are stabilizing at the very least. But what's up with Steven Stamkos? Just 1 goal in 8 games. He's a -7 plus minus. Do you think this is just an adjustment period, or is there something going on that we're not aware of?
I really think this is just an adjustment period. On the Locked On Predators podcast, we always like to remind our listeners, not only is he learning all of this new on the ice, a new system, he's playing with new teammates, different timing. He is also off ice, still trying to find the ketchup at Trader Joe's. Everything is different. And so we like to joke and say, look, he's still trying to find the ketchup on ice as well. The timing is very different, the way that Nashville has been playing at the beginning of the season and the pace at which Steven Stamkos is used to getting the puck, especially on that power play. So I think that there are growing pains, and it's not just Steven Stamkos that has to adjust. I think Nashville players are also figuring out the changes they need to make to be effective line mates with him as well.
Now, the Predators' next game in Tampa, the big homecoming for Steven Stamkos. Talk to me about what this is going to mean for him and how badly does he want to have a good game?
I was just talking about this today with somebody from Tampa Bay, and it's going to be a really interesting night. I think it's going to be a very emotional night. Here's the upside of Steven Stamkos. He is such a professional. And while this is going to be a big emotional night for him for sure, I think he's going to be very focused on trying to play well back at Amalie Arena in front of all of these fans who really love him and want to see him succeed, even if he's not in a Tampa Bay Lightning jersey. I think it's going to be high emotion. I think that the rest of the team is going to need to be very steady for him. I know this Nashville Predators locker room really likes Steven Stamkos. And so they're going to want to do everything they can to get him a win in front of the Tampa Bay crowd. So it's going to be up to, I think, the Predators team to really work hard and get that win. Andrew Brunette had an interesting comment when he was asked about the game. And he said, it's probably going to be best for all parties involved to get it over with. Instead of having this date looming over them and the emotions, kind of hanging over not just Steven Stamkos, but also the fan base and the players in Tampa Bay, I think it's going to be good to get to this game. He deserves all of the credit, all of the kudos, all of the adulation he is going to get. But I think it'll be good for everybody to sort of close this chapter.
Yeah, and we'll see how all of that goes. Are you concerned right now about the backup goaltending? Scott Wedgwood, yeah, only 2 games, small sample size, but a couple of shaky performances.
He did not have a great preseason, and I think that really concerned a lot of people, but it's very hard to gauge what the preseason means when you're looking at an 82-game regular season. I don't think it's time to worry about Scott Wedgwood. He had a really good performance against the Columbus Blue Jackets in their second win this weekend at the back-to-back, and that was really important. The goals that he did give up, there were some defensive breakdowns in front of him, and so his stats take the hit, but I think it was maybe more the play in front of him. He has talked about the fact that this is an adjustment too. This is a different defensive system that is in front of him. So he isn't yet able to just anticipate automatically what the defense is going to do in front of him. So it is another one of those players that's going to take time. And when you're a backup goaltender, the time doesn't come as often as you want. So he's trying to really lock it down in practices. And the more we see him in game situations, I really feel confident that he is going to continue to improve.
One thing that doesn't always get a lot of attention, but that the Preds are doing very well so far this season is the penalty kill. More than 93% success rate, second in the league. Talk to me about what's made the penalty kill effective, and there's even a shorty in there too.
Yeah, this has been one of the bright spots in a really tough start to the season. This is a completely different penalty kill system. Dan Highnote, who used to run the penalty kill, is no longer with the Predators. This is a completely different system. And so we've had a chance to sit down and talk to some of the players. And the way that they describe it, just in layman's terms, that this is much more aggressive. This is much more skating. This isn't just protecting kind of that high quality ice. The object of this particular penalty kill system is to interrupt passes. It's to cause fumbled pucks. It's to be able to clear the puck quicker and not even let shots get off. So I think you're seeing Nashville being really successful at it. Of course, they've had a lot of practice. They've been in the box an awful lot, and they've got to stop doing that. But I think that is one area where the team really has a lot of confidence. This penalty kill has been so successful, and against players who are usually very good on the power play. So this is one of those things where you're hoping maybe the momentum from that area of special teams games can carry over and kind of boost the 5-on-5 play.
And the power play also needs a little bit of work as
Needs
of
to
right
work.
now. Yeah.
Yes, and hopefully it's going to come down to that Steven Stamkos timing. If they can get the puck to him in a way that he is used to, I think you're going to see Steven Stamkos kind of blossom back again on the power play for Nashville.
So do you think this team has figured it out and we now go from here, or are we still going to see some inconsistency from here forward?
I don't think they figured it out yet. And that comes down to something as simple as the line combinations. We saw two very different starting lineups in a back-to-back situation. I'm not sure Andrew Brunette knows for sure what the right combinations of these lines are. So there's still a lot of growing that this team needs to do. What I think has improved is the understanding of what it's going to take to win these games. And I also think the locker room has grown through the adversity. At one point, Jonathan Marchessault referred to the team as a little bit fragile. And I think battling back, especially in their last two games where they were down 2 goals to start the games and being able to find ways to win, I think the confidence is slowly growing, but there's still a lot they need to iron out in Nashville to be the contender that a lot of people predicted they would be.
All right, and I know you'll have your finger on the pulse every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
You can find the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platforms. You can find us on social media at LO_Predators. I am on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. And my co-host, Emma Lingen, is on social media at Emma_Lingen as well.
All right, and thanks so much. Always great talking hockey with you.
Yep. Thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice for Locked On NHL fans, Erica L. Ayala. And Erica, great to talk a little Kraken with you for a change. And, pretty good start to the season, and now they've dropped 3 straight. What's been the biggest difference over the last few games?
Well, I think first what we can start with is that Vince Dunn, one of our defensemen, is on LTIR. And we were on our Thursday episode for Locked On Kraken last week with Zane Begg. And we talked about that production drops when Vince Dunn is not in the lineup. At least those are what the numbers that we saw last year. And it would stand to reason that that is a part of what's happening. I think you can also chalk it up to, as we heard Jared McCann say after the most recent loss to the Hurricanes, and Joey Daccord also re-emphasizing this, who he was in net for that game, that this is a team that's very much still trying to get seamlessly integrated into new systems under a new head coach, and not a complete overhaul of a coaching staff, but definitely changes. Now, while Dan Bilesma knows the organization because he was the head coach for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, our AHL team, for the last 2 years, and the year prior to that, when we were, as I like to say, co-parenting with the Florida Panthers and the Charlotte Checkers, he was on that staff as well. There wasn't a head coaching position, so he was an assistant coach there. So there is continuity, but that continuity has existed within the pipeline, not necessarily with this full roster.
Talk to me about, you mentioned Jared McCann. He and Jordan Eberle just off to great starts so far this year.
Well, and that's another thing that I've been talking about on the podcast. Jordan Eberle named our second ever captain a captaincy I've been calling for quite a long time. Dan Bylsma wasted no time announcing Eberle as captain, and Eberle told us after that first game, an afternoon game Pacific time against the St. Louis Blues, that he is a lead by example guy. And whether he would admit to it or not, Gil, you have to think that knowing that this is a role that he is stepping into, that he has been anointed, so to speak, the captain, that I think you're seeing in his game that he's taking his role very seriously. And it's not that he hadn't before. Eberle has always been a stalwart as far as I'm concerned. I know you, of course, know what Eberle can do and some of his best scoring years, of course, with the Islanders, but I think that's what we're seeing is him, practicing what he preaches. He's a lead by example guy, and he's going out and getting this offense started. What I would add as an alternative way of thinking about it is that he is with Jared McCann, and at least in the most recent games, with Matty Beniers. Now, this is a combination that has worked in the past. Of course, Dan Bylsma going to play around with the lines. He also has said overwhelmingly he's not going to be committed, to and have things set in stone to where they're not able to move around as necessary. But what we have seen is that has been a line that's been effective. So I think what we're seeing with, as you mentioned, McCann, who's been our leading scorer the last 2 seasons, alongside Eberle, and Beniers, who had a 2-goal game the other night, that's just a really good combo right now.
Talk to me about Beniers, the progress he's making. We're all waiting to see him develop into the player he was expected to be. Sounds like he is making some progress.
Indeed, and it's very related to what I was saying about Eberle and, of course, McCann. That trio, they have always worked well together when we've seen them in the past. I think that their games suit each other very well. And so you have someone like Jared McCann, who you might consider more of a finesse player. I mean, that's within the context of the Seattle Kraken, but he also has had to learn because he's played center for us when our lineups due to injury have been a little bit skewed. And so what you're seeing is a really balanced effort, and there is a level of comfort. So the players, they kind of can anticipate where each other are going to be. And why I like that for Matty Beniers is because he's learning to be a little bit more of that alongside, again, Jordan Eberle, who I think just taking on that leadership role has really stepped up his game. And now Matty Beniers is an alternate captain. And then you have, again, he's learning alongside and able to facilitate alongside Jared McCann. And, I think Matty Beniers came in with, there was a lot of pressure. You don't perform after winning Rookie of the Year, and everyone's writing articles about you in a season where the team's not doing well. There's a little bit of pressure off, more of the conversation, of course, about the coaching staff changes, even Shane Wright. And there's not as much pressure for Matty B. He's come in focused, and we're starting to see that pay off on the score sheet, although I think that his game has translated off the hop for the Seattle Kraken this year.
Talk to me about scoring depth. We don't see a lot of it right now. Top line producing, where are the other goals going to come from?
And what's interesting about the Seattle Kraken is that we actually saw them revert, and I do mean in a good way, to the fourth line early in this season being one of the more productive lines. And so we're looking at times where Ty Cartier, Yanni Gourde, and Brandon Tanev were starting games for the Seattle Kraken and able to activate pretty early on in the season. Now, as I said, that top line indisputably is the Beniers line. But we haven't seen, and it's something we talked about on the podcast recently, we haven't seen Andre Burakovsky, who is healthy. So that's not the reason. He is healthy this year, but we haven't found a groove for him yet. He's bounced around a lot. Oliver Bjorkstrand, another player who I think has been and will continue to be great for the Seattle Kraken. Haven't quite found the right fit for him. And that goes in lockstep with Eeli Tolvanen. And so there is a little bit of shifting of the lines, the chemistry, not exactly, in my estimation, where the Seattle Kraken wants it. So I think that we're going to have to see a little bit more. I know we're getting a little deeper into the season and early into the season, but I do think that we'll see a few more changes with the lines as opposed to having them set because we're not getting production from, quite honestly, scorers like Burakovsky Slavkovsky, Bjorkstrand, and I didn't even mention Chandler Stevenson yet, but we're not seeing the consistency that we know can be a part of their game. So I think it's back to the drawing board when it comes to, again, outside of that Beniers line and to some extent the Yanni Gourde line, have to just switch some things around.
Special teams have also been an issue lately. What's going on with the power play and the penalty kill?
Well, I think one thing goes to the first thing I mentioned, Gil, is that Vince Dunn not being a part of the fray right now, that is an impact. He is definitely one of our offensive defensemen, very integral on the power play. Now, Ellie Tolvanen, not a defenseman, but someone that we have seen on that power play unit in particular. But again, that's a little bit of experimentation. What I like, at least what we're seeing on the power play, and we've noticed this early on, and we maybe have reverted back to habits that are a little more familiar, but the Seattle Kraken are being much more aggressive, going north-south as well as east-west, using the complete surface of the ice to their advantage, as opposed to kind of having set positions, almost like a zone, if you think about it that way. And so, again, that is an adjustment. It comes with the new coaching staff. There are some personnel changes that are happening, some because of the circumstance with Vince Dunn, others just to give people opportunity. So I think the Seattle Kraken will settle in, but absolutely it's something, especially given how special teams operated last year, that you hope is something that clicks sooner rather than later.
All right, Erica, I know you'll have your finger on the pulse of the Kraken all year long. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can start by heading over to this very podcast on every other Friday, including this week, Locked on Kraken, where we, of course, do our women's hockey spotlight, and every day, Monday through Friday, at Locked on Kraken, which, just like Locked on NHL, can be found on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow the show at Locked on Kraken, most active on either directly on YouTube, also have Instagram, and I still call it Twitter, so we'll go with that.
All right, Erica, thanks so much. Looking forward to seeing you again on Friday.
Thank you, Gil.
All right, I want to thank my guests, Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, and Kimmel of Locked On Predators, and Erica L. Ayala of Locked On Kraken for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, Locked On NHL is here for you every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. Thanks again for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Becoming a fantasy hockey expert and getting the edge over your league mates is easy with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks again for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.